The NFL draft isn't just about picking the next generation of stars, it's the exact moment when hidden deals explode behind closed doors. While fans watch rookies walk on stage, teams are already quietly moving veteran superstars, dumping contracts, and reshaping entire franchises in complete silence before anyone notices. But what really happens in those silent conversations will change how you look at draft weekend forever. While most fans are locked in on draft picks and first-round drama, the real NFL business is happening somewhere completely out of sight, and it's not pretty. This is the part of the league where winning takes a backseat to money. Because right before and during draft weekend, teams quietly start looking at their expensive veterans and asking a brutal question: is this player worth his contract, or is he worth more as cap space? And that's where so-called salary dump trades begin to take shape. These aren't emotional decisions, they're not about loyalty, they're math decisions. A veteran who still plays at a solid level can suddenly become tradable overnight if his cap hit is too heavy. And once that happens, the phone lines across the league start heating up. One example that's been floating around in these conversations is Kenny Moore. On paper, he's still a valuable defensive piece. But when contracts, guarantees, and cap structure enter the equation, value starts to look very different from talent. Teams like the Colts aren't just thinking about next Sunday anymore, they're thinking about 3 years from now. And sometimes that means agreeing internally: if the right offer comes, we move on. That's the part fans never see. Because these deals often don't come with fireworks, there's no announcement, no build-up, just a quiet agreement between teams that a veteran's time in one city is ending, even if he's still playing good football. And the timing matters even more. Saturday of draft weekend is often where these deals quietly happen. The league is distracted, media focus is elsewhere, and front offices take advantage of that noise. But here's the twist. Not every name being discussed actually gets traded. In fact, most don't. But the fact that they are even in the conversation tells you everything about how cold and calculated the NFL really is behind closed doors. Because in this league, your contract can matter just as much as your performance. And that's exactly why some of the biggest surprises every draft season come from players nobody expected to move at all. But once you understand which players truly fall into this category, you start realizing the draft isn't about rookies at all, it's about survival. Once you move past the obvious salary dump veterans, the NFL draft conversation shifts into something much more dangerous. The zone where elite players start getting quietly evaluated not just as stars, but as financial decisions. This is where things get uncomfortable. Because now we're talking about big money defensive stars, players who are too good to ignore, but too expensive to fully commit to without hesitation. Take names like Dexter Lawrence. On the field, he's the kind of defensive force every franchise dreams about. A game wrecker, a player you build around, not move on from. But in today's NFL, even players like that don't escape internal conversations. Front offices are constantly running scenarios in the background, not public rumors, not fan speculation, real internal discussions like, what would it take? Or would we ever consider it if the offer was overwhelming? And even when the answer is no, the fact that the question exists tells you how the league operates now. Then you have edge rushers like Jonathan Greenard, players who sit in that perfect middle ground. Not untouchable, not expendable, just valuable enough that teams would listen if the price gets crazy. That's where draft week becomes unpredictable. Because while fans think everything is about drafting rookies, front offices are balancing something much more complex. Future extensions, cap flexibility, and roster windows that can close faster than expected. One big contract mistake can affect 3 seasons of planning. One unexpected trade offer can force a franchise to rethink everything overnight. And the truth is, most of these elite player trade talks never become real deals, but they shape behavior, they influence draft picks, they affect how aggressively teams move up or down the board. So even if Dexter Lawrence isn't going anywhere, the idea of him being in the conversation changes how teams think. That's the hidden layer of the NFL draft nobody sees. It's not just about who gets picked. It's about which stars force teams to rethink everything behind closed doors. And that's where the real pressure begins, because once elite talent enters financial debate, nothing in the draft stays predictable anymore. Every offseason has that one situation that quietly sits in the background until suddenly it doesn't. And for the Philadelphia Eagles, this conversation keeps circling back to A.J. Brown. On the surface, there's no real drama. He's a superstar receiver, a core piece of the offense, and one of the most physically dominant players in the league. But in the NFL, even superstar status doesn't protect you from the salary cap clock. Because right now, there's a very specific financial trigger sitting in the background, the June 1st designation rule. And that one detail changes everything about how teams think during draft season. If a team ever seriously considered moving a player of this caliber, the timing wouldn't be random. It would be calculated, delayed, optimized for cap relief rather than headlines. That's why his name keeps coming up in off-season discussions, even when nothing concrete is happening. And internally, this is where NFL front offices get split. On one side, you have the football decision: you don't trade a player like A.J. Brown under any circumstances. But on the other side, you have the financial reality: if the cap situation becomes tight enough, you at least have to model it. That's the uncomfortable truth about modern NFL roster building. Every elite player comes with a second conversation attached, not just how good they are, but how flexible they are under the cap structure. And that's what makes draft week so interesting. Because while fans are focused on rookies and trades, teams are quietly mapping out worst-case scenarios months in advance. Most of these scenarios never happen. In fact, almost all of them stay theoretical. But the fact that they exist at all is what makes the NFL unpredictable. Because once a superstar's contract enters that internal what-if folder, it never fully disappears again. And even if A.J. Brown never moves, the cap clock doesn't stop ticking. It just keeps pushing teams to think about decisions they'd rather never have to make. And that's where the pressure quietly builds, right before draft chaos takes over the entire league. Every NFL offseason has that one name that refuses to disappear, no matter how many times teams shut it down, no matter how many times insiders say it's unlikely. And for the Las Vegas Raiders, that name has been Maxx Crosby. On the surface, nothing about this situation screams trade. The Raiders have publicly leaned into the idea that he's a cornerstone of their defense. The messaging is clear: he's part of the future, part of the identity, part of the rebuild. But the NFL is rarely as simple as public messaging suggests. Because behind closed doors, every elite pass rusher comes with a question that never fully goes away: what if someone makes an offer we can't ignore? That's where the rumor cycle starts, not from official sources but from whispers, speculation, and the league's natural obsession with star defenders potentially changing teams. And even though current reporting suggests there is no active trade push, the conversation keeps resurfacing because Crosby represents something every contender wants: relentless pressure off the edge, leadership energy, and game-changing disruption on every snap. But there's a layer underneath all of this that makes the situation even more complicated: health and timing. Crosby's knee situation has been part of the background discussion, and while the expectation is that he will be fully ready moving forward, NFL front offices don't operate on hope, they operate on certainty. And that's where things get tricky. Because even if a player is expected to be 100% by August, any uncertainty forces teams to pause, to reassess, to calculate risk instead of just talent. That's why, in theory, if anything ever changed with Crosby, it wouldn't be a sudden draft night blockbuster. It would be a delayed, calculated decision later in the offseason, the kind of move that only happens when teams have full medical clarity and complete roster confidence. But here's the reality. Most of the time, these rumors never turn into actual deals. They exist because elite players always attract speculation, especially when franchises are rebuilding or reshaping identity. Still, the fact that Crosby's name keeps circulating tells you everything about his value across the league. Because in the NFL, you don't hear trade rumors about average players. You hear them about game changers. And that alone is what keeps this conversation alive, even when nothing is officially happening. In the NFL, talent is never the only thing that decides a player's value. There's something else that quietly controls everything behind the scenes, something teams rarely talk about publicly but obsess over internally. Injury certainty. Because when draft week arrives, front offices aren't just asking, "How good is this player?" They're asking, "How confident are we that this player will actually be available when it matters?" And that's where everything gets complicated. Take the situation around Maxx Crosby. On the surface, the expectation is simple. He's an elite pass rusher, a foundational piece, and someone most teams would build a defense around instantly. But once injury history or medical reports enter the equation, even the safest assumptions start to shift. A knee issue, like a meniscus repair versus a minor trim, might sound small to fans, but to NFL executives, those details change the entire risk profile of a player. Because they're not thinking about Week 1 highlights. They're thinking about availability in August, durability through a full season, and whether a player can hold up under playoff-level intensity months later. And that's where draft week decision-making becomes a projection game. Teams start weighing things like, is he fully ready now? Will he be fully ready later? And what happens if he is? Even when medical staff give optimistic timelines, front offices still build in doubt. Not because they don't trust players, but because they've seen too many situations where optimism didn't match reality. That's why even a player who is expected to be fully healthy can still create hesitation in trade discussions involving premium draft capital. Because once you're talking about multiple first-round picks, the stakes change completely. It's no longer about upside alone, it's about certainty. And certainty doesn't exist in football. Only probabilities do. So when teams evaluate elite talent during draft season, injury status becomes the hidden filter that can quietly raise or lower a player's trade value without a single public announcement. And that's what makes this phase of the NFL so unpredictable. Because sometimes the biggest deals don't fall apart because of talent. They fall apart because of doubt. At the highest level of the NFL, every major trade decision eventually collapses into one brutal question. Not is he good? Not will fans like it? Not even does it make us better next season? It becomes something much more extreme and much more uncomfortable. Would you bet your house on it? That's the exact mindset front offices fall into when they're discussing blockbuster deals involving elite players and premium draft capital. Because once you enter the territory of multiple first-round picks, everything changes. Now you're not just trading for talent, you're trading for certainty in a league where certainty doesn't really exist. Take a player like Maxx Crosby as the perfect example of how this thought process unfolds. On paper, there's no debate. He's a game wrecker, a defensive identity changer, someone who instantly elevates any contender. Most teams would say they want him without hesitation. But then the second layer hits. Medical projections, long-term durability, contract structure, future cap flexibility, and the uncomfortable truth that no matter how confident you are, you're still guessing what happens 3, 4, or 5 months down the line. That's where the house bet question becomes real. Because it forces decision makers to strip away emotion and reputation and ask something far more dangerous. If everything goes wrong, do I survive this decision? That's why so many blockbuster trades never happen, even when the talent is obvious. The risk isn't just about losing value, it's about losing control of your entire roster-building timeline. And in the NFL, one wrong projection doesn't just cost a season, it can set a franchise back years. So even when teams feel 90% confident about a player's health or impact, that last 10% hesitation is often what kills the deal. Because no GM gets fired for avoiding a risky trade, but plenty get remembered for making the wrong one. And that's the reality behind every draft week blockbuster rumor. It's not about who is available. It's about who someone is finally brave enough to bet everything on. And in a league built on uncertainty, that's the one question that decides it all.